Hello, it's so good to have you here again. Today we're traveling to Jericho, a wealthy, powerful and feared city. Its walls, built upon foundations of stone and mud bricks, were so wide that entire houses were constructed on top of them. On the horizon, palm trees swayed in the wind and the sunlight glimmered upon the watchtowers. At first glance, Jericho seemed invincible. But behind that image of glory hid a dark reality. In the narrow streets, trade flourished. Wine, fabrics, and perfumes were sold amidst temples dedicated to strange gods. The nights were lit by torches and dominated by rituals of fertility. Religion had become a spectacle. Human sacrifices burned on the altar of Ashtoreth, while the people believed that pleasure could buy the favor of the gods. And in the midst of all this lived a forgotten woman, Rahab. Her house, built on the city wall, served as a refuge for travelers and soldiers. Branded by shame, she had learned to survive in a world that used and discarded her. Yet deep inside, Rahab carried a question that no pagan deity had ever answered. Was there a God who truly saw the human heart? As the years passed, rumors began to spread through the city. People spoke of a strange nation that had crossed the desert, sustained by an invisible God. They told stories of seas parting, manna falling from heaven, and enemy armies destroyed by a single breath. And within Jericho's walls, those rumors spread like wildfire. The God of Israel was coming. While many mocked, something different happened in Rahab's heart. Fear turned into reverence, and reverence into faith. Somehow she knew that this God was real, and that when he arrived, no wall built by men could stand before him. What Rahab didn't yet know was that her home, the most unlikely place of all, would be chosen to become a refuge of salvation, and that the scarlet cord hanging from her window would change the destiny not only of a city, but of her very soul. The sun over Jericho rose blazing, reflecting on every stone of the walls and on the clay rooftops. The city awoke amid the noise of carts, the clatter of merchants opening their stalls, and the distant sound of flutes echoing from pagan temples. The air was thick with incense and dust. Between alleys and narrow streets, women hurried by with water jars balanced on their heads, while soldiers patrolled with suspicious eyes. It was a living city, and at the same time weary of itself. Rahab watched everything from the window of her house built upon the city wall. From there she could see the desert stretching as far as the eye could reach. The hot breeze carried the scent of date plantations, mingled with the bittersweet odor of wine spilled upon the altars of false gods. The city breathed sin and luxury, and she, who no longer had tears to shed, breathed the same air every day as if inhaling her own shame. From a very young age, Rahab had learned the cruel price of being a woman in Jericho. In a culture where purity was currency and the body an object, she had become a survivor. Each night she welcomed into her home men of all kinds, soldiers, travelers, merchants, and when the sun rose she felt the weight of being forgotten by them all. They called her a prostitute, and although she pretended not to care, there was an emptiness that consumed her. Sometimes at night, lying on the rough fabric of her bed, she wondered if there was any God who truly knew her by name. Jericho was a devout city, but not to a God of love. In its squares and temples, they sacrificed children to appease stone idols. Priestesses danced in fertility rituals, and people believed that pleasure could buy blessings. Rahab had seen it all, the laughter, the blood, the gold burning on the altars, and her heart grew heavy. None of it seemed right. There was a voice deep within her whispering, "This cannot be what heaven is like." One morning, as she went down to the spring of Ein Sultan to draw water, she overheard a group of men speaking in fearful tones. They spoke of a people coming from the desert, led by a God who performed wonders. They said the sea had opened before them, and that the Jordan had turned into a wall of water to let them pass. They told of mighty kings who had fallen before this nation, and that the name of this God made warriors tremble. Rahab froze. A chill ran through her skin. It was more than a rumor, it was a promise. While others mocked, she stayed silent. Something inside her, something that had long been asleep, awakened. It wasn't fear, it was reverence. For the first time she heard of a God who was different, a God who set people free instead of exploiting them, who looked at the heart rather than appearances. That night, as she returned to her house, she lit a small oil lamp and stared into the desert. Far away, a cloud of dust rose on the horizon, perhaps the sign of an army on the move. The warm wind carried the distant beat of drums. The whole city was talking about it. Women gathered their children, men sharpened their swords, and priests shouted prayers to idols, begging for protection. But inside Rahab's house, the silence was different. She did not pray to the gods of stone. She whispered to the wind, "God of Israel, if you are real, show me who you are." That night sleep did not come. The traveler's words echoed in her mind. She remembered the years of humiliation, the looks of disdain, the empty promises. If that God truly existed, maybe there was hope even for someone like her. Maybe there was still redemption for a marked woman. The following days were filled with tension. Double patrols, locked gates, rumors of war. But along with fear, Rahab felt a certainty growing inside her. The God who came with that people was not like the gods of Canaan. He was righteous, and a righteous God would not destroy without first saving those who sought him. On the seventh day, as the sunset painted the sky red, Rahab climbed once more to her window. The walls that supported her home seemed eternal, cold, unshakable, powerful. But deep within her, something told her that no stone could stand against the power of the God she was beginning to know. For a moment, she closed her eyes. The wind brought the faint scent of rain, though the sky was clear. And in that instant, without knowing why, Rahab wept. She wept as she hadn't in years. She wept for all she had been, for all she had lost, and perhaps for something that was yet to come. The sound of trumpets had not yet echoed. The spies had not yet arrived. But something inside her was already collapsing. Not the stone walls, but the walls of her heart. Because before Jericho fell, God had already begun to tear down what bound her within. The streets of Jericho were restless. The wind blowing from the desert carried not only dust but also rumors, stories spreading from mouth to mouth, crossing gates, squares, and markets. People said that the nation of Israel was camped on the other side of the Jordan, and that their God had dried up the river just as he had once parted the sea. The elders met in secret, soldiers trained with fury, and priests raised offerings before the idols of Ashtoreth and Baal, trying to appease the fear that grew like a shadow between the city's walls. Rahab heard it all. From her high window, she could see messengers crossing the makeshift bridge, bringing news that left faces pale and voices trembling. At night, the temple bells rang for long hours, and the flames of the altars lit the tops of the towers. The people sought answers from their stone gods, but within Rahab's chest, a different fire was beginning to burn. She remembered the travelers she had once sheltered months before. Men from the south who spoke with awe in their eyes about a people led by an invisible God, a God who had opened seas, sent fire from heaven, and fed multitudes in the desert. At that time, Rahab had listened in silence and believed, not with the faith of one who understands, but with the instinct of someone who recognizes truth the moment she hears it. While fear took hold of Jericho, Rahab felt a kind of reverence she had never known. The gods she had served all her life were mute and cold, but the God of Israel seemed alive, real, personal, a God who fought for his people, but also guided them, sustained them, and protected them. And if he could open seas and rivers, surely he could also open a path inside the heart of a forgotten woman. One morning, Rahab went out to the marketplace. The air was dense, heavy. The vendors spoke in low tones, as if even whispering the word Israel could bring disaster. At one of the stalls, a merchant gestured wildly. "They're coming, woman!" "The Jordan has opened," he whispered. "The fields of Moab have been taken, and the kings Sihon and Og have fallen before them like chaff in the wind." Rahab clutched the water jar against her chest. Her heart raced. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That their God fights for them?" The man replied, crossing himself in haste. "And Jericho will be next." The woman stood frozen in the middle of the street. Around her chaos reigned. Priests running, soldiers shouting, mothers clutching their children. But inside her everything went still. Those words echoed like a divine summons. Their God fights for them. That night Rahab could not sleep. She climbed to the roof of her house and looked toward the desert. The moon shone high and the wind carried a distant sound, the faint echo of trumpets perhaps. She remembered the prayers she had whispered in secret, asking that this God would hear her, and now she felt he was near. "If you are the living God, do not pass me by," she murmured, eyes filled with tears. "If you can set your people free, set me free as well." At that very moment, Rahab did not know it, but her prayer was rising under the same sky beneath which the Israelites marched. God had already heard her, and what was about to happen would change everything. The next morning, the city was different. Extra guards at the gates, night patrols, strict orders from the king. No one entered, no one left. But the rumor grew louder. 2 men had been seen nearby, strangers, foreigners. And Rahab's eyes lit up with something no one else in that city felt. Hope. She descended the stairs and walked through her house deep in thought. Every step echoed as if time itself were running out. Perhaps those men had come from the Israelite camp. Perhaps they were sent by the very God she had begun to believe in. And if they were, she would help them no matter the cost. While the city prepared for war, Rahab prepared to obey, because in the midst of a nation gripped by fear, only one woman possessed faith. And you, listening now, have you noticed how God often reveals himself in the most unlikely places? Sometimes it's in the most wounded, forgotten heart that he chooses to ignite the flame of faith. And if these stories have been speaking to your heart, if you want to keep discovering what God did in this woman's life and what he can still do in yours, subscribe to this channel now and walk with us through stories that transform hearts and rekindle faith. Rahab still didn't know it, but the footsteps that would echo that night would change her destiny forever. Outside, 2 men walked quietly under the moonlight, hiding among the shadows, searching for shelter. And the place they would choose would be her home. Because when God is about to act, nothing happens by chance. Night fell over Jericho like a heavy cloak. The warm wind swept through the narrow streets, carrying the smell of smoke from the altars and the distant murmurs of temple vigils. Guards moved back and forth, their torches casting trembling shadows on the walls. It was a night of tension, fear, and expectation. The people could feel that something was about to happen. Outside the city walls, 2 men watched Jericho from the darkness. They were Israelites, spies sent by Joshua to scout the enemy's territory. They were weary, covered in dust, but their eyes burned with determination. They knew the mission was dangerous, perhaps without return. The enemy was strong, the walls impenetrable, yet they trusted the same God who had parted the Red Sea. They moved silently, hiding among the rocks until they found a narrow path. Carefully they climbed the slope, avoiding the sound of loose stones. From above, the city seemed asleep, but they knew there were eyes everywhere. One mistake could mean death. After slipping through a side gate, they blended with the small crowd that still wandered through the taverns and alleys. They pretended to be foreign merchants, wrapped in long cloaks and with their faces covered. The noise of the feasts helped mask their steps, but the tension was palpable. At every corner, the echo of voices and the flicker of torches made them retreat into the shadows. Then one whispered, "We need shelter. Someone who won't ask questions." The other nodded. And at that moment, they saw a house on the city wall, discreet but with a light still burning. A place where strangers came and went unnoticed. A place of passage and of secrets. They climbed a side stairway and knocked softly on the door. Rahab opened it. For an instant, time stood still. Her eyes met theirs, and something within her confirmed what she had already sensed. These were men of the living God. "Help us," one of the spies said quietly. "We've come in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel." Rahab looked back, making sure no one had followed them. The guard's footsteps echoed in the distance, growing closer. For a brief moment, fear took hold of her. If she were caught, she would die as a traitor. But something stronger than fear spoke louder. The certainty that God had chosen her for this moment. "Come in, quickly." She opened the door wide and shut it behind them. The spies entered, and she extinguished the lamp by the window. The room dimmed, lit only by a flickering flame. Rahab's breath was quick, her hands trembling. "Everyone here fears you," she whispered. "I've heard what the Lord did in Egypt, about the sea that opened and the kings who fell before you. And I know," her voice faltered, "I know that your God is the God of heaven and earth." The men looked at each other. This woman, whom they had never met, spoke with a conviction few in Israel possessed. Outside, the sound of boots grew nearer. Someone was banging on doors, shouting, "2 men have entered the city. We're searching for foreigners." Rahab didn't hesitate. She led the spies up to the roof and hid them under bundles of flax drying in the moonlight. Then she calmly went downstairs, opened the door and faced the soldiers. "Yes, men came to my house," she said firmly, "but they left before the gate was closed. So if you hurry, you may catch them." The guards rushed off, running down the road toward the Jordan. Rahab waited until their voices faded, then climbed back to the roof. "They're gone," she said, catching her breath. "They're on their way to the river." The spies looked at her, astonished. The courage of that woman was beyond understanding. There was something sacred in her decision, something she herself could not yet explain. "The Lord will reward what you've done," said one of them. "Many fear what's coming, but few would choose to stand on his side." Rahab drew closer, her eyes glistening. "I don't want to live among gods who neither see nor hear anymore. If your God can save, then I want to belong to him." Outside, the wind beat hard against the walls, and the sound of the desert seemed to whisper what was coming. But inside that house, something had already changed. For the first time in her life, Rahab felt peace. In the heart of that proud and fearful city, God had found a refuge. And in the heart of that woman, the Almighty had found faith. Have you ever thought that sometimes God may be calling you in the midst of danger, confusion, and fear, just as he called Rahab? If this story is touching you, take this moment to subscribe to this channel. Walk with us through this journey of faith and discovery, and together we'll witness what God still has to do in the life of this courageous woman. Outside, the gates of Jericho closed for the night. But within the wall, where no one could imagine, a story was beginning. A story that would echo through the centuries. The story of a woman and of the God who brings down walls. Dawn broke over Jericho, bringing with it a heavy silence. The streets that once overflowed with voices and trade now breathed fear. Guards patrolled the gates, and the king had ordered every tower to be reinforced. The news about the spies had spread like wildfire, and Rahab's name began to circulate in whispers. Some said they had seen her talking to foreigners. Others claimed she was hiding something, but no one had proof. Up on the rooftop, Rahab stayed alert. The wind swayed the bundles of flax beneath which the men were still hidden. She knew that if they were discovered, the punishment would be death, not only for them but also for her and her family. Even so, there was no regret in her heart. Something within told her she was doing what was right, no matter the cost. By evening, when movement in the city slowed, Rahab climbed back up to the roof. The moon rose over the desert, painting the sky in silver tones. The spies stood up, ready to depart. The older one, his face marked by the sun, looked at her with respect and gratitude. "The Lord has used you to save us," he said. "And for that he will save you as well." Rahab stepped closer, her gaze steady. "I beg you, when the Lord gives you this land, remember me. Save my father, my mother, my brothers, and all who belong to me." The men exchanged glances. That woman, foreign, scorned, and forgotten, spoke with the faith of someone who already belonged to the people of God. "Listen carefully," one of them said. "When we enter the city, tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. Gather your family inside your house, and everyone within these walls will be safe. But if anyone leaves, his blood will be on his own head." Rahab held the cord carefully. The scarlet thread shimmered in the lamplight, almost alive. It was more than a sign, it was a promise, a covenant between her and the God of Israel, the same God who redeems sinners and transforms destinies. "So be it," she replied. "Your word is sacred." In silence, she helped them descend through the window, fastening the rope to the old stones of the wall. The wind blew hard and every creak made her heart race. When the last man reached the ground, one of them looked up and said, "Hide yourself in the hills for 3 days until the pursuers return. Then go back home and wait. The Lord is faithful." Rahab nodded. "The Lord is faithful," she whispered, watching them disappear into the darkness. She remained there, holding the scarlet cord, gazing at the horizon. The desert seemed to sleep, but she knew it would soon become the stage of a holy war. The red thread fluttered in the breeze and her eyes filled with tears. It was just a piece of fabric, yet it carried a profound meaning, life hanging between judgment and mercy. In the days that followed, Jericho was gripped by vigilance. The gates stayed locked, the altars burned day and night, and priests cried out to the stone gods to keep the walls standing. Rahab watched it all with a heart torn between fear and hope. No one knew what was coming, but she had already chosen her side. Her father and brothers mocked her when she told them what she had done. "You've lost your mind," one of them shouted. "You betrayed the king for the sake of 2 men you don't even know." Rahab kept her eyes firm. "Not for them," she said. "For God, the true God, the living God." Deep inside, she knew that faith always demands courage, and sometimes courage looks like madness to those still imprisoned by fear. That very night, Rahab hung the scarlet cord from her window. The fabric swayed softly above the wall, visible even from afar. She spent hours looking at it, wondering if God himself could see it, if that simple sign would be enough to save those she loved. The sound of trumpets echoed for the first time days later, a long, deep blast from across the river. People rushed to the walls in panic. Rahab stood in silence, staring toward the desert. There they were, the people of Israel marching quietly around the city. No shouting, no swords raised, only trumpets and steady footsteps. Her heart pounded. Each circuit felt like a prophecy. Each day another march, and with every trumpet blast, the scarlet cord fluttered as if breathing faith. Then Rahab understood what that symbol truly meant. The blood that saves. Just as the blood of the Lamb had saved the Hebrews in Egypt, that scarlet thread represented the same promise, a reminder that God always distinguishes those who trust in Him. Do you see how God transforms even the simplest signs into eternal promises? If this story is touching your heart, if you too long to live under that same covenant of faith and salvation, subscribe now to this channel. Each new story here reveals how the power of God still brings down walls today. Outside, the trumpets grew louder. Inside the house on the wall, Rahab embraced her family and prayed in silence. The God she had chosen was coming, and with Him the beginning of a new life. The seventh day dawned beneath a sky ablaze. The clouds, stained crimson, seemed to announce that something momentous was about to unfold. Jericho awoke in uneasy silence, the heartbeat of the city racing beneath the weight of dread. The gates were bolted shut, the towers crowded with archers, and the priests had spent the night crying out to their gods. But on Rahab's face rested a serenity no one could understand. From atop the wall she could see the Israelite camp on the other side. The ranks of men, the trumpets in the hands of the priests, and before them the Ark of the Covenant, the very symbol of the presence of the God she now served. Every detail of that scene pulsed with power and mystery. Then the sound of trumpets began to echo again. It was not the call to war, but the sound of worship. Israel marched around the city once more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 circuits, and then the seventh. With every step the earth trembled beneath the feet of the people of God. Inside Jericho, fear had turned to despair. Men shouted commands, women wept, children hid. Rahab clutched the scarlet cord, her eyes fixed on the procession. That vibrant color fluttering in her window was all that separated her from destruction. Her father, mother, and brothers were with her, gathered as she had instructed. With each blast of the trumpets, the ground seemed to shake beneath them. "They're just walking," one of her brothers cried out in panic. "This is madness." Rahab didn't turn her eyes away. "It's not madness. It's faith," she said firmly. On the seventh circuit, the men of Israel stopped. A deep silence spread across the valley. For a heartbeat, even the wind dared not blow. Then Joshua raised his hand, and the sound of the trumpet split the air like thunder. The people shouted, and the walls, those massive stones that had stood for generations, began to quake. The sound was deafening. Stones shifted, the earth trembled, and in moments the impossible happened. The walls of Jericho collapsed, falling in clouds of dust and flame. The roar of the people thundered through the valley as the city vanished beneath smoke and ruin. Rahab fell to her knees, covering her face. Everything around her was collapsing. Screams mingled with the sound of crumbling stone and spreading fire. But in the midst of the chaos, her house stood firm. While everything else fell, the portion of the wall where Rahab lived remained untouched. "Look," her father shouted, eyes wide. "Our house, it's still standing." The scarlet cord whipped violently in the wind, yet it held fast. It was the sign of the covenant, the reminder of a promise. And while destruction swallowed the city, Rahab's home stood like an ark amid the flood. Suddenly footsteps approached, familiar voices. The two spies appeared, covered in dust and ash, but alive. They found her among the ruins and called her name, Rahab. "Come, we will keep our promise," one of them shouted, extending his hand. She helped her family climb down one by one until they were all safe. Behind them, the roar of the burning city rose higher. The spies led them beyond the ruins to the camp of Israel. There, among the people she had once only heard of, Rahab breathed the air of freedom for the first time. The sun was already high when she looked back. All that remained of Jericho were ashes and smoke. The walls that had once symbolized pride and power were now dust. Yet within her, something entirely new was taking root. She knelt and prayed aloud for the first time. Lord, now I know, no wall can stand against you. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did, for choosing me when everyone else rejected me. The spies came closer and smiled. The God of Israel is the God of all the earth, one of them said. And today you are part of his people. Rahab wept, not for the ruins she left behind, but for the life that was beginning before her. Shame had been replaced by faith, fear by trust, the past by promise. Years later, Rahab would marry Salmon, a prince of Judah. From that union would come Boaz, the very man who would redeem Ruth, the Moabite. From their lineage would arise David, and centuries later Jesus Christ himself. A foreign woman, once rejected and marked by sin, would become part of the lineage of the Redeemer of the world. Do you see what God can do with a life surrendered to him? Many of us spend years behind walls of our own making, guilt, fear, regret. But a single act of faith is enough to bring them down. If this story has spoken to your heart, subscribe to this channel and continue walking with us. Each story reveals that when God moves, not even the strongest walls can stand. Jericho fell. But one woman once lost was raised forever. And the scarlet cord, a symbol of blood and hope, still speaks today. The grace of God reaches those who believe, even atop the crumbling walls of their past. The story of Rahab is more than the account of a destroyed city and a rescued woman. It is a living portrait of what happens when the grace of God reaches someone in the most unlikely place. In the midst of Jericho's idolatry, sin, and moral decay, he saw a soul that could still be transformed. Rahab lived on the margins, forgotten, rejected, and marked. But the God who sees the heart found something precious within her faith. And that faith, though small and fragile, was enough to move heaven. When she hung the scarlet cord in her window, she wasn't just obeying an instruction. She was declaring her total trust in the God of Israel. That red thread fluttering above the walls symbolized the very same blood that centuries later would be shed for all of us. While Jericho crumbled, God was building a new story for Rahab. The woman once despised became part of the chosen people. She married, had children, and entered into the genealogy of King David, and ultimately of Jesus Christ himself. It's impossible not to be moved by the magnitude of that redemption. Rahab reminds us that there is no sin so deep that the love of God cannot forgive it. No past too heavy for the cross. No wall high enough to block the reach of grace. And when faith rises, even what once seemed lost can bloom again. These 6 moments in Rahab's journey, from shame to faith, from faith to salvation, show us that God still writes new stories through lives surrendered to him. If you believe that, if you want to keep growing in faith and discovering more stories like this, subscribe to this channel now, like and share this video. That way more people can discover that the same God who brought down the walls of Jericho is still bringing down walls today. Because when faith meets grace, there is no barrier, no past, and no guilt that divine love cannot break through.